of the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast. My name is Yadi Caro, and in each episode, you will learn a new skill with the help of an expert. When I say an expert, it's that in each episode, I make sure to find those people who are very well known in their field, and I have been very fortunate to get to have a conversation with them. And I am very grateful that you are listening, learning, applying, and sharing this with others. This is simply why I do this. Through this podcast, I have met so many wonderful people, and I feel honored that they have featured me in their own shows as well. This is the case with Dr. Krister Lowe. Dr. Krister Lowe is a co-founder and chief of innovation at sixteamscondition.com. He is the pioneer of the Team Coaching Zone podcast and the co-editor of the Practitioner's Handbook on Team Coaching, the first handbook of its kind. Dr. Lowe is an organizational psychologist by training and has deep expertise in coaching top and mission critical teams. He invited me to do a podcast collaboration, and this episode that you'll hear first aired on his feed, which I share here on my notes. And we talked about the fascinating field of team coaching, what makes great teams, and practices you can apply now to make your team a high-performing team. Let's listen.
Well, good day, everyone. Great to see you guys here. We have a special podcast this week. Yadi Caro from the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast and me, Krister Lowe, from the Team Coaching Zone. We're going to be doing kind of a joint podcast collaboration. So Yadi, great to see you. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the opportunity here, Chris. And I listened to your show, and I learned so much. So I have a lot of questions for you. I want to pick your brain.
Well, I'm back at you. I mean, I was really impressed. I was just on your website, and you've had some real headliners. You had Jeff Sutherland on, and David Marquette, and great stuff. But we actually connected at Harvard, right? In recently on a course. Actually, one of my friends is teaching a course on coaching, and that's how we connected, and discovered that we both have podcasts, have interest in team coaching and agile and the like. So that's kind of what we're going to be exploring today. So Yadi, how do you want to start? Do you want to talk a little bit about who you are for the listeners to start off, and then maybe I can do the same? Or
Yeah. So, and as you mentioned, I have the podcast, Hardcore Soft Skills, that I started in 2020, during that time where the uncertainty and everybody just felt the need to create a lot of things. And I've been working for the past 15 years with different military organizations. I'm not part of the military, but I support working as a consultant, tech consultant, and in different roles. And just recently, for example, in the Scrum Master role. So I've been working with military organizations, but also passionate about on the tech side, but also very passionate about the soft skills side. And that's why I started the podcast. And also I'm currently a student in Harvard for industrial organizational psychology. So I've been and I want to learn from your experience as well in that field. And I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and I have been living in different places, like lived in Germany for a little bit, and then over here right now in Florida. And I have my 2 young boys as well. So nice. That's pretty much in a nutshell of a quick overview. And I want to know about you, because some of our listeners may not know about all of your experience.
Sure. Well, like you, I'm an organizational psychologist. So I did my master's degree, and then I actually started my PhD at Columbia University in New York City on September 11, 2001 at 9 a.m. was my first class. And it was really a dramatic kind of start to my doctoral training. I was actually in a center called the International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution at Teachers College at Columbia. And it was a research group, and we were studying intractable identity-based conflict. And 11 minutes into my first class, the planes were hitting the buildings down in downtown Manhattan. And it was like a traumatic start to my doctoral program. I actually went to Columbia to study change management, and while I was there, I did my master's in change management, but I also did a dual master's in conflict resolution and conflict management.
Ah,
So, anyways, I wasn't really sure exactly where my path was going to take me, but while I started off with this traumatic start to my doctoral program, and then I just by chance got lucky and won a 4-year contract to do conflict resolution skill building for the United Nations staff. And so I was like a young practitioner. I built a team. We went all over the world for the UN, like 30, 40 countries. And we were in the political missions, the peacekeeping missions, humanitarian settings. And it was just a great place to be out working with people, trying to do good work, really diverse teams and challenging settings. And you ended up seeing the best and worst of human behavior on display. But I did all kinds of soft skills training, which is interesting because that's
mm,
something it sounds like you've been interviewing folks around in conflict resolution, negotiation, mediation, performance management, leadership. And then we started facilitating team stuff and retreats. And anyways, I went out into the corporate sector as well during a good 10-year run. And my doctoral dissertation and my work all kind of coalesced around what I was seeing was that while conflict resolution and soft skills were useful and necessary, they tended to be, at least the conflict resolution stuff was a bit more reactive. And I
mm,
kind of felt like we would get people back to a baseline, try to heal some trust and damage. But I wanted to get on the front side where we build proactive, healthy teams and leaders and groups before they get into such trouble and then they need so much intervention. So really
mhm.
in 2015, I started a podcast, the Team Coaching Zone, and the rest is history. And so I've really just been focusing on teams the last 8 years, interviewed a lot of, kind of names in mainstream
Yeah.
team coaching. I've interviewed some folks in the agile world as well. But, then I started hosting master classes. I interviewed Ruth Wageman, who, wrote, I think still to this day, the best book on leadership teams. It's called Senior Leadership Teams, What It Takes to Make Them Great.
Mm,
And she and I ended up partnering up around a company called the number six
mhm.
team, TEAM conditions. And so
Yeah.
we've been training practitioners, working with companies and organizations around this stuff. And yeah, I've been loving it. And suddenly it's like a dream. 8 years have rolled by and it's been amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Because I want to know more. There's two things I want to know more about in terms of team coaching. Because I've been
Yeah.
taking, as you mentioned, I took this class about executive coaching, and I took like a courses on like ADHD coaching, and
Uh-huh.
now I'm learning more about agile coaching, and I'm aspiring to become an agile coach. How would you
Mm,
differentiate all these
yeah.
types of coaching?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great question. Well, I think team development and team effectiveness has been a topic of study and practice for decades. But, as the life coaching and executive coaching became really more mature, I think really around 2010 or so, 2010 to 2015, that really became a bona fide industry. And I think the big value executive coaching brought was instead of sending managers and leaders to a 2-day workshop or a 1-day thing or even a year-long program, the idea is that by actually assigning them a coach and having them, gain insights about themselves and learn as they're actually leading
Mm-hmm.
through, sessions every 2 weeks or week, whatever it is, that over 6 months or a year has a way bigger effect than cramming people into training workshops. So I was looking at the same, analogy for teams, that a lot of the teamwork that I was doing in the early 2000s and the like, was half day, 1 day, 2 day, sometimes 3-day retreats where we take teams off site. Everybody would get jazzed up and then they'd go back to business on Monday. And I think just the habits and routines were so deeply ingrained that a lot of the great agreements and commitments people made just never really materialized. And I'd get the same team the next year and
Mm-hmm.
the same set of issues, Um,
Yeah.
I started thinking about, well, to become a team, just like to become a great leader is an event. It's not an event, it's a process. So, what does it take to actually really help teams set themselves up well, get moving really well, and then make the course adjustments along the way? So, for me, that's really what team coaching is about. It's really about helping a team accelerate their formation and ultimately their learning and performance. Um, and that kind of can take lots of different flavors. But, my work I tend to work with a lot of leadership teams, but I work with project teams as well. And so there's a little bit of one-on-one coaching with the team leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Not all teams have leaders, but the majority still do. And so I think that's important. But then it's really about the team as a unit and
Mm.
coaching them. I mean, they're the main, the main client. So that's kind of what we do. And, sometimes these engagements, are just short. They just want a kind of a team launch, but typically they're 3, 6, 9 months long, where we're
Oh,
kind of walking alongside and helping them see themselves, like holding up a mirror, helping them gain insights. And, I pick up a lot of principles from Agile,
mm.
Kanban, and Scrum, and I introduce a lot of those techniques and principles to teams, but I'm not like purely religious doing those things. I'm drawing on other team coaching frameworks and the like. And,
Yeah.
bringing that all together to help teams really just get to where they're trying to go a little bit more gracefully and faster, hopefully.
Yeah, it's interesting because when it comes to team coaching, it just seems like um, you mentioned that them working as a unit. It seemed
Yeah.
like it will be such a difficult thing to do because everybody, wants to have possibly their own goals or their own kind of
Yeah.
ideas of the whole process. So, what
Yeah.
are some of the challenges when it comes to that to coach a team of
Well,
people?
I
Yeah.
think you kind of hit the nail on the head. That actually in the 6 conditions, the first condition is something we call a real team, which
Mm-hmm.
means that just calling a team doesn't make it so. That
Yeah.
actually a team only exists if it is required to do some kind of interdependent work that can't be done working separately. So that a team isn't always the best solution for everything, but for complex knowledge work that is dynamic, teams oftentimes are a good fit. But so I think the first thing is, do you really need to be a team? And if so, why? And then from there, we can start to move into putting in place what we think are 6 things, including this idea of real team and interdependence, a set of structures that really drives the behaviors in teams, which is what I think helps really moderate different personalities. Everybody has different preferences and maybe even values or goals, but you need to harmonize that in getting a team really going in the right direction. And so, what we say
Mm.
is before we focus on the behaviors in teams, we want to put in place a structure or
Yeah.
a set of conditions that really brings a lot of clarity around the purpose of the team, why it needs to be a team, what it's trying to accomplish, what talent's going to be needed, how is it going to work. I think a lot of the agile practices come in there just around ways of working,
Mhm.
cadences and rhythms, and how the team's going to reflect and learn and coach along the way, right? And what kind of support does it need? So when we do that design work, it's kind of like building, you want to go to Mars, you need to build a really killer rocket that's
Mhm.
going to withstand the journey. And so that's what I mean by like design and putting in place. We want to build the shell of the team to be able to withstand all the forces first that are going to try to keep it on the ground, right? Once you have a rocket, you need to break it through all the inertia. And
Yeah.
that's, organizational pressures, competing commitments, internal forces, external forces that are trying, will try to sabotage that team right as it gets going.
Mhm.
But if you
Yeah.
can get it
Mhm.
moving well enough and get some flow going, then it can break through that. And then, it's never a straight line to our destination. There's lots of pivoting and learning along the way. So, we
Yeah.
kind of look at beginnings, middles, and end points. And these are times when teams really tend to be more receptive to coaching interventions. Yeah.
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 Well, what about you, Yadi? Tell me a little bit about how you became a Scrum Master, and what is it about the work with teams, coaching teams, or whatever you call it, that
Yeah.
gets you excited? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started, I've been engaged in more working with different teams
Mm,
in other roles. Like for example, working I was in the knowledge management field and have to
mm,
interact with a lot of different people to get things moving, and as well in project management. So
yeah.
it was always about different interactions with multiple different teams, and in order to
Mm,
get something moving forward, like engineers and developers
right.
and getting things done. And I fell in love with Agile
Yeah.
framework because of the fact that it was all about that collaboration, about getting people together,
Mm,
openness to collaborate and make things happen. Everything centered around either a particular product or a particular activity. So
mm-hmm.
just kind of like everybody working towards the same mission, no matter where they were located. So, and I've been exposed to working in agile teams over like 6, 7 years ago. And since
Mm,
then, I'm just trying to kind of like get more involved in that. I'm kind of finding my way, either getting
yeah.
education. I was a product owner, Scrum product owner, then became a Scrum master, and now becoming a certified agile coach. And I still have a
Mm,
lot to learn. And one of the recent not activities, but in my current job that I'm involved in is working with multiple teams and
mm,
kind of help educate on agile principles. And
right.
it's interesting because it's you can see all the dynamics. Like I work with some high performing teams that, as you say, they kind of like have a
Yeah.
mission, a goal, and people that are trying to like not
Mm,
necessarily like kind of not sabotage, but I guess necessarily kind of there's some jealousy involved, in
yeah.
like
Yeah.
high performing teams. So it's very interesting. I want to work with people and make things happen, and I love facilitating, and I want to keep
Mm,
educate. What I see my role is more like bringing people together, and
hmm.
also providing some guidance, and also helping them come up with their own solutions as well. So I've
Sure.
always kind of like that whole facilitation aspect. So what my current challenges are in terms of like there's so many things to do. Where do we even get started? Or like
Yeah.
dealing
Yeah.
with like the skeptics and things along those lines. So
Hmm. Hmm.
have you dealt with like skeptics, or do you have suggestions of kind of when it comes to,
Always. I
yeah, how
mean,
do you deal with
I think the oftentimes what happens is, people will come up to me, so prior to the pandemic, a lot of the work we would do would start with some kind of in-person launch, and it might be preceded by some interviews and some team assessments and some one-on-ones. If there was a team leader, there'd be some one-on-ones. So there'd be kind of some wind up, but then it would kind of culminate at least at the start of the engagement in a face-to-face 1 to 2
that?
days, and I would always have people come up towards the end of the 1 day or 2 day and say, you know what, I came to this really, I was grinning it and bearing it. I wasn't really looking forward to it, but this was the best training or workshop I've ever been to in my life. So I think some of
Yeah.
it is that people have been, death by PowerPoint type
Oh
things,
yeah.
from trainings and soft skills training. And so, my whole thing is to really engage like the full human being. So for me, it's like using data, using dialogue techniques, getting people up and standing. I use embodiment work and, just, variety and just engage different kinds of learners. And I think, different ways of learning and, meet different kinds of learners where they are. And I find that people get really engaged. And then, following those launch events, I think that's when the coaching really kicks in, because dreaming who we want to be, how we're going to work together, setting goals, identifying metrics, and doing all these things, that's kind of the fun part. The real change work begins when we try to implement that plan. And I
Hmm.
think that's where, some of the Scrum and Agile practices have really helped a lot, because I think for me, what the big thing that was missing from mainstream team coaching, and I call it mainstream, and I don't know, maybe you guys in Agile would call what you guys do mainstream, and what we do is the alternative stuff. Um, but I think out of the coaching field and people who have backgrounds in learning and development don't know a lot about Agile principles and practices, maybe not have a lot of training. So I think they're like parallel streams of team development or team effectiveness in these different worlds. But I think the big thing that was missing from the training that I had and all the different programs I went to was really the discipline around the work itself. And I think that's what I really picked up from Scrum and Kanban, was really looking at what is the work of the team, what are the right cadences and rhythms to work in, how to help the teams reflect and iterate and pivot faster. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the stuff, the classic or traditional team coaching programs that I've experienced, there's a lot of focus on purpose, getting people feeling safe with each other, and
Hmm.
it's a little bit more focused on the people and the direction than it is on actually the work itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a blind spot, because at the end of the day, a team exists because there's work to do. Although, there are teams that exist to learn, and maybe teams that exist to innovate or to lead. But, typically it's because there's something the team has got to do together that forms the basis for the team in the first place. And if you're not clear about the work, and
Yeah.
strikingly, it's hard to get clarity on work, right? I mean, somebody has commissioned a piece of work, but even the person who commissions it isn't oftentimes clear, like the product owner, right? In Scrum, you oftentimes really have to help them clarify what it is they even want, because they don't really haven't thought through it a lot of times, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. So you said you work with multiple teams. So are these like teams that are nested or interconnected, or they're separate?
Yeah,
Uh,
there
yeah.
there are right now. It's teams that are within the same, I guess, big organization. They
Mm,
just work different functions, but at the end, a lot of the work overlaps in
okay.
particular. So it's like on the technical side,
But
and
it's
at the end, the
team
work.
teams work.
Yeah, and it's
Mm,
overlapping, and that's what we're trying into a process of like how to merge those things together, make things
right.
flow. So there's a whole big transformation going on,
Mm,
and being part of that and to help teams figure out how to make that happen is it's quite challenging, but at the same time it's very exciting because you feel like there's a lot of eagerness
yeah.
of people. And when in general in either these or other organizations that I've worked with, that's it's kind of, it feels that people sometimes feel that they need like permission to do something or to like reach
Mm,
out to the other team and collaborate.
yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if you've experienced that in terms of
Well,
like
for
teams that
sure. I
are,
mean,
yeah.
and there's some, powerful psychology about,
Mhm.
groups and group identity, and just even in laboratory experiments, putting randomly assigning people to two or more groups can create in-group, out-group dynamics and group identity very quickly. I mean, in a laboratory study in 45 minutes or an hour, it's striking how much, people will develop, group dynamics right out of the gate. So for sure, I think, yeah, sometimes I have these training exercises or exercises in the room where I'll have break up a larger team of people into groups of 4 and
Mhm.
have them accomplish a task. And I'm really struck that it's very rare, like 1 out of 100 times, people will actually get up from their team and go look at what other teams are doing. Because I never say you can't go check out what other teams are doing,
Uh,
but they're creating something, they're building something, a tower or something, whatever it is they're doing. And it's just striking how they basically strip out the context, they get laser focused on the task in front of them, and they become unaware of the other stakeholders in the room. They rarely
uh,
ever ask me, the instructor or the trainer, for assistance. And I
uh,
think that's very revealing just around our behaviors as human beings. And I think one of the best things we can do as team coaches or working with teams is help them see the environment, the context that they're in, and who do they need to be connecting to. And even there, a lot of times they will create a victim mentality that the organization doesn't care about them, nobody's coming to help them. But a lot of times that's based on untested assumptions. And
mm,
when we get teams to like go out and engage the stakeholder who's so-called difficult or not responsive, they're surprised more often than not that, oh yeah, they were really helpful, or
yeah.
they're willing to support us, or they're willing to be. So it's interesting. I think a lot of times there's a lot of assumptions
Mm.
that we
Yeah.
bring about what's possible. And I learned this as well from the negotiation and conflict resolution world, where, a lot of times these conflicts were very difficult. But I'd be surprised, if you could get people into a place, get their defenses down a little bit, and open into a little bit more of a learning mode. There's so much more that can be negotiated than people think, even in things that seem impossible and there's just no way out. Again, a lot of times that's really more fear and defensiveness speaking than actually have we actually really looked openly at what's really might be possible here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting in what you mentioned, because yeah, it seems like our initial defensiveness and reaction is more like we're competitive, or we think like when we're separated in groups in a either work environment or in an exercise, as you mentioned, it just seems like okay, we're immediately in competition, and this
Yeah.
the assumption that okay, who's gonna do better and who's gonna be get the gold
Yeah.
star on the
I
on
have a
the
great
task. Yeah.
I have a great little exercise I do with teams. It's one of the first things I do, regardless of the size of the team I'm with. And it's this little exercise where it's like kind of an icebreaker, but a way to get started. But I have everybody stand up in a large circle in the room, wherever we are. I can also do this virtually, but I think it's more dramatic when you do it in person. And I asked them if did they think they can count to 21 as a group? And they say, oh, yeah, for sure. But they don't know the rules yet of the game. And so I say, here's the rules: is we have to count to 21, but the number has to come out. We have to go in sequence 1 to 21, but the next number has to come out randomly in the group of people. And if two people say the next number at the same time, we have to go back to the beginning. And anyway, and they're not allowed to create a pattern, so they can't point out and call out. So what happens is they can't get past like 5 or 6. Like one person will say 1, then another person will say 2, and then 2 or 3 people will say 3. And then I go back to the beginning. And what happens is, it's a really interesting exercise. They try harder rather than smarter. They don't slow down to listen. And people are trying to jump in. It's like very individualistic behavior. So then I let them fail 5 times to get them frustrated. And then I say, okay, you guys, you had your 5 attempts. You didn't get too far. Do you want some help and some coaching? And they say yes. So then what I do is I have them turn around and face outward so they can't see each other and close their eyes. And then I take them through kind of a mindfulness body scan. I get them connected to their head, their heart, their guts, all the way down through their body, sensing the room. And I have them in their mind's eye imagine that they're inside of a bubble together and they're all interconnected. And I do some breathing. I get them to breathe in sync with each other. It takes like just a little 5-minute kind of mindfulness thing. And I'm not like a mindfulness Zen meditator or anything, but I have them really listen and slow down. And, I talk about slow is fast. I ask them to sense the space. And when they think there's space, to call out the next number. And you'd be surprised, 9 times out of 10, they can nail it, getting to 21 without interrupting.
Wow.
Randomly around the circle. And if they can't get it on the first time, the performance is always like 3 to 4 times better. Nice. But it's so surprising. But when I end the exercise, I'm like, okay, guys, what happened? Why is it you're able to do it now, but you couldn't do it 5 times before? And a lot of it's a really powerful thing around the power of mind and the power of team, but it requires a shift in mindset. And so I think a lot of the things you're talking about, the focus on individual preferences or personalities or personality conflicts or authority struggles is a big one. That's because we haven't created an environment and the conditions for a group of people to collaborate. So I use that exercise as a metaphor that what we're going to do today, or in our beginning of our work together, is create an environment so we can create that kind of flow between you as a group of people. And when I do that exercise with teams that have been really broken and have a lot of dysfunction and conflict, it brings a little bit of hope, like, oh, we can collaborate. We actually can be more than the sum of the parts. And then, we can kind of move into more of the technical kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's for me, that's a great metaphor of when a group of individuals is less than the sum of the parts versus when it becomes more than the sum of the parts. Yeah.
That's a fascinating example. That exercise of mindfulness, and it reminds me, because Professor Livingston, she would, before every class, will make us like do a mindfulness exercise and kind of just get into the class and helping us focus. But I think it's fascinating that the exercise that you do, and you talk about creating the environment. So if, let's say, if we're on a work environment that we probably are not going to be doing before each workday a mindfulness exercise, which could be great, but what are some of the things that you think would be good to kind of
let's take meetings, I think, for example. So a classic place where groups meet are in meetings, whether they're weekly meetings or daily stand-ups or retreats. So I think the way people meet is really interesting. And I think when most people think of meetings, the energy just drains out of their bodies, right? Because it's like they're just, time sucks and I can't get the work done I want to do. But some of that is because our meetings are terribly unproductive. And, one of the things, again, like I said earlier, I work with a lot of leadership teams. So I will go in and observe leadership teams in their meetings. And I have lots of things that I'm looking for. But one of the classic things they do is they have an agenda. And every leader gets 7 minutes to share what's going on in their area. And then they have some other decisions they want to make. So usually what happens is the first 3 people who go get the best amount of and they never stick to 7 minutes, because whatever leader brings up gets juicy and then they get. So it actually takes like 45 minutes to get through the first 3 leaders' report outs. And so if you're not in the first 3, you're kind of out of luck. And then after 45 minutes, people's attention starts to run out, I notice phones start coming out. People start going to the bathroom. They start getting snacks. And then,
Mhm.
and then there's like, oh my God, we're like an hour into the meeting. We only have 30 minutes left. Let's say this is a 90-minute meeting. And then they rush to get through other people. But the work they're doing is so low interdependent. Exchanging information is like one of the lowest forms of teamwork that you can do. We're not
Mm.
consulting, we're not coordinating, we're not making decisions, we're not even doing collaborative work in the meeting. So, for example, one of the things I oftentimes help teams do is learn how to actually work in their meetings much more effectively. And so, a simple way to start a meeting to get people present is to start with acknowledgments. So,
Mhm.
I'll just create 3 to 5 minutes where I'll say, I want you to think of somebody on the team in the last week who's really done something for you or contributed something to the team that you want to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And it's just a powerful little thing. It creates a positive climate. People are
Mhm.
rarely ever recognized or acknowledged for what they do, but it
Yeah.
just creates a little warm bubble. Yeah, I didn't have to do the whole meditation thing. It was just like a little thing.
Mhm.
Um, we can check out, scoreboards or metrics to see how we're doing. I mean, I think there's lots of ways we can structure meetings so that they feel productive, they feel, uplifting, people are getting acknowledged, we can make decisions, solve problems and the like. So anyways, I think
Yeah.
there's little things you can do, nothing I think can replace like doing a good team launch from time to time. I mean, I'm on a team myself and we get together every quarter pretty much for 2 days. And
Oh,
it's
nice.
such time well spent because
Mhm.
in those 2 days, we can cover a lot of ground. And then in between, we're able to accelerate the work. And, we're meeting multiple times a week on Zoom calls and the like because we're not co located. But I
Yeah.
think face to face interaction is critical, right? And I don't know
Yeah.
if the teams you're working with are co-located or not, or
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, they are. And it's one of those organizations right now that I'm working with. It's just that they were not remote, basically. And it's great because it's you are able, but everybody's kind of like in different spaces as well. But even with that, it's kind of difficult to kind of shift the mindset of like, let me just go across and knock on the door and ask the question. Also, sometimes it happens a lot too that that collaboration happens, and it's just the power of face to face. So but at the same time, a lot of good collaboration happens like via chat as well with when even if we're in the same room, but we're just able to kind of like send quick messages and things like that. So I guess it's just in knowing that people are around us and we can just reach out to them if needed. But I guess it makes a big difference, as you mentioned, the face-to-face collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the team that I'm on, we just found that our weekly team meetings just devolved like into these leadership team meetings of just doing updates. So we actually killed
Mm,
those. We don't do them anymore. We
okay.
just meet quarterly, make kind of major strategic decisions, but then we have actually working meetings on the 2 or 3 big projects we're working on. So
Hmm.
when we come to a meeting, it's very focused on the work and a couple of updates, get snuck in here and there, but pretty much the focus of the meeting, it's like 45 minutes and we're collaborating on, a piece of work that really benefits from more than one person leading it. So having multiple people working on it and that, we have found that that works pretty well. A lot of my work with teams, like I said, I work with a lot of leadership teams, but is really visual management, helping
Hmm.
them visualize their work,
Yeah.
and I think that really helps a lot, helping them start to get into some cadences and rhythms with the leadership teams. They tend to work better on like 6 to 8 week rhythms because the
Mm,
scope of their work is strategic. So it doesn't tend to get done in a couple weeks or a month or two. So I
yeah.
think finding the right rhythm, I think for teams is really helpful, and that's something I picked up from the agile trainings that I worked in during the pandemic. Ruth Wagaman and I, a partner of mine, we worked with a COVID-19 respiration unit that was stood up, and
Yeah.
they had seen 1,500 patients in a month. They were triaging.
Mm,
This is
wow.
early in the pandemic, and when people were really, it was
Yeah.
much more dangerous. People were dying, and so then they realized that they were surviving on adrenaline, and it was the most meaningful work of their lives, but also highly traumatic.
Hmm.
And the team leaders, there was 2 team leaders of this unit. There's 18, 20 people, doctors and nurses and physicians assistants and the like. And they said, we really are not going to sustain ourselves if this pandemic goes on for a long time. So we
Yeah.
got asked to work with these people. And but they said, but we don't really have any time to meet with you. The only time we can meet is Friday morning at 8 in the morning to 8:40.
Yeah.
So they said, can you coach us,
Oh, wow.
once a week for 40 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to kind of innovate. And so what we came up with is we met for 30 minutes every week with the two co-team leaders to
Okay.
get a pulse of what was going on. And then every Friday we would be on a Google Meet.
Yeah.
We had Miro board, and they were standing in in their meeting room in scrubs with masks on and everything, and we
Yeah.
would have a 40-minute coaching session. And it was striking that it took us about 5 to 6 sessions
Mm-hmm.
over 5 to 6 weeks, and they got a chance to. We did the first thing we did, the first session, we could only do one thing basically every session. There was an opening, something to get them open, and then do an activity. So we started the first session doing a retrospective.
Nice. Yeah.
We did something called the 4 L's. You may know that one, where looking back on the last couple of weeks, what have you liked about how you've been working as a team? What have you learned? What's been lacking in your
Mm-hmm.
ways of working, and what are you longing for in the next couple of weeks? And just that alone created a space for healing, acknowledgement, connection, and identifying some coaching topics. And so then after that session, we went back to the leaders, and we said, okay, where do we go next? And then the next session, we focused on mapping their critical stakeholders, because they were kind of like so lost in their work
Mm-hmm.
that they couldn't think about the larger system, hospital system, and where the bottlenecks were coming from upstream and downstream from their work. So the second session, we just did a visual mapping on Miro of their stakeholders and
Mm-hmm.
identified 2 big bottlenecks. And these were people who were labeled as difficult directors and hospital administrators who were in the way. So
Mm-hmm.
we challenged 2 of them to go off and meet with those administrators before the next session. Sure enough, they had breakthroughs when they
Mm-hmm.
finally went and met with their stakeholders. So anyways, we marched along, worked on their purpose, got them into rhythms. And what was interesting, this team, when I asked them, I said, how far out into the future can you see? They said 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They only had about 2 weeks of clarity. So I said, there's no sense planning anything beyond 2 weeks. So
Mm-hmm.
let's get into a 2-week rhythm. We
Mm-hmm.
will go from meeting every week to now we'll start meeting every 2 weeks. So we introduced a 2-week sprint rhythm,
Yeah.
and got them to think about what could they accomplish over and above the delivery of all the COVID triaging work they were doing, to move the work of this unit down strategically and just incrementally in 2 weeks. So over the
Yeah.
course of 2 months, they became this amazing team. They were already great when we met them, but they had no discipline and, agreed upon approaches to working.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, and it was all virtual, right? We never got to meet them in person or anything. So what that case
Wow.
really revealed to me was it challenged a lot of my assumptions around the 1-day, 2-day launches and all this
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff, that actually just small injections of reflection, taking stock, making little pivots, which is, I think, really iterative learning, and what, a
Yeah.
lot of the agile practices bring, really works.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be time consuming. It doesn't have to be exhausting and painful. But,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I think that was like one of the best team coaching engagements I ever was involved in. And it was the lightest touch of them all.
Nice. And the
Yeah. Yeah.
impact that you see happening with it, with that team that you're working with. And I like, as you mentioned, all these agile practices. The retrospective is a very powerful one, because
Yeah.
just doing that with any team is kind of helps them
Mm.
reveal a lot of things, and identifying things to work on,
Yeah.
specifically for the next sprint or the next couple of weeks. That's pretty powerful and creates change. I've seen that one of the teams I'm working with right now. It's like the impact
Mm.
that they have in terms of self-reflection and identifying how to reach out to other folks. So it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So are the teams you're working with mostly engineering teams, or are they software teams, or mix
Yeah,
of
there's
both?
a little bit. I work with engineers, primarily developers. So I'm kind of like starting right now. And the great thing is that
Mm.
I have access to great agile coaches too. So I'm
Okay.
learning a lot from them. I'm in my aspiring journey for currently Scrum Master, but also kind of like looking to help more teams as well. So
Mm.
I wanted to ask you about that in terms of, as a coach, do you have a coach or coaches that kind of help you on that journey too?
Oh, do we hire coaches to work with us? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
right now we don't have a coach, but we have in the past. I think
Hmm.
it's challenging. I have done like a lot of soft skills training and workshops for teachers and school
Hmm.
systems as well. I've done work in a lot of different environments, but teaching teachers was always the most difficult because they were
Hmm.
like the worst students because they don't, there's like a major authority shift, right? So they have a hard
Hmm.
time like being good students, good learners. So I think I learned this about team coaches, which is
Hmm.
also true that interestingly, most team coaches aren't on teams themselves, first of
Hmm.
all. So they tend to work as solopreneurs or in small shops.
Yeah,
Or, if they are part of a group, there's like a home group, but most of their work they're doing is out working and serving others.
yeah.
And I actually, right before the pandemic, I started to do a really interesting program, and it was on a 200-foot long ship, a Dutch tall ship from
Nice.
like the early 1900s. So, one of these big, think of these big sailboats with all the masts and all the big
Cool.
sails. And so I had 20, I did two voyages, one from England to Portugal and one along the coast of Norway. And we brought team coaches, like 15 in the first voyage and 25 in the second, out on
Hmm.
these boats. This is like for 7 days, 2 weeks. One of them from England to Portugal was a 2-week trip. But what we
Yeah.
wanted to do was create an environment where we could learn about leadership, being in teams ourselves, but also team of teams,
Hmm.
but in an environment that's really unstable, like VUCA. It's volatile. It's the definition of VUCA because when you're on the ship, everything, you cannot plan anything because everything is dynamic.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea. And one of the biggest insights we got was when you have 25 coaches and team coaches on a ship divided into teams, working in teams, they're all trying to coach each other. They're terrible at being in teams together. And it was like a
Right.
huge epiphany for a lot of them that they were like, oh my God, we do this for a living for our clients, but we're not on teams ourselves. And I think a lot of them after that trip got into teams and started to try to live and breathe this stuff, and our own team, we've definitely had our developmental struggles along the way, and we had to zoom out and apply on ourselves a lot of the techniques and things we do. And we don't get it right all the time, but periodically we've had coaches, and
Yeah.
it's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great and
Yeah.
interesting. Sounds like like a fun experience too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go and talk a little bit more about soft skills because we have addressed
Let's
those
do it. Let's do
throughout.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like what you mentioned in the very beginning that it was the approach from being reactive, like rescuing either a
Mm,
team from conflict or
yeah.
but taking the more proactive approach. What are some of the key skills that you think are critical for any team to have and to kind of
Any team.
really practice and cultivate like proactively, even if they're
Yeah.
doing great?
Well, again, I think the theory of change that I operate from around teams is that structure drives behavior. And I think one of the problems with a lot of team approaches out there is we tend to focus on things like conflict, trust,
Yeah.
psychological safety, feedback. And a lot of those are the behaviors. But I think what gives rise to a lot of those things are those underlying structures around
Mm.
purpose, interdependence, designing the work practices and the like. So I think first of all, my big thing is to really help teams make sure they get that in place. If the team is really clear on its work, it's moving down the field, then I think soft skills training starts to become more interesting because then it has a context within which it actually can work. One of the
Mhm.
big problems I did like hundreds and hundreds of trainings in conflict resolution for the UN, and
Mhm.
one of the big problems I had was that even if people learned the skills, they didn't feel at all safe enough to apply those in the teams that they were a part of or in the
Mhm.
environments they were a part of where there's a lot of managerial abuse or authority, different cultural approaches to organizing and, there's a lot of the issues in the UN were around managers. So I
Mhm.
think that's why I think training needs an environment that enables the training skills to work. But
Mhm.
anyways, to the point is if a team is well designed, then I think things like, communication, conflict resolution, feedback is a big one. So like performance management,
Yeah.
really I think feedback is big, like being able to give positive feedback as well as really critical feedback is something that most people have a hard time doing. And it's, it's challenging emotional skills. I think, not all teams have leaders, but again, most of the teams that I come across in organizations are still leader led. And ironically, most team leaders have zero to no training to little training in how to design, launch, and coach their teams. So I
Hmm.
actually think training in how to lead teams
Yeah.
is a massive thing that's hugely missing in the leadership development space.
Yeah.
So, those are a couple things. Sometimes I'll do trainings with teams. There's so much focus on the team that the individual gets lost. So I might do like an individual psychometric
Hmm.
assessment, like different ones, and then have them sit in a group and share individually about their own strengths and styles and things, but identify like a learning goal of how they want to stretch as part of their work on the team. And then we do something called feed forward, which
Okay.
is instead of giving feedback on how that person has behaved in the past, it's more about, let's say I have a hard time delegating work. I always want to micromanage. And we do an assessment and we're sitting in a circle and I hold up my profile and I say, oh, I think one of the things I really want to work on the next 3 months is getting better at delegating. I know I micromanage. And then what you do is you give like 5 minutes, that person isn't able to speak.
Hmm.
The other people then come up with ideas about how to do that. And I'm listening to them talk about and give ideas about how to be better at, delegating or not micromanaging. And then I can take down notes of ideas I like and cherry pick the ones I like. And then later I can go and apply them. And I think that's a really powerful little training exercise. You go around the room and so everybody, it creates a lot of psychological safety. It gets people also in a mode where they can expose in a place of safety, building on strength, areas where they could stretch even more. And so anyways, I think that's it's kind of a form of feedback really, but it's more
Yeah.
forward facing. So it's people don't feel like beat down from it or they don't get defensive. Like they get into a place where they really want to grow and stretch themselves. So anyways, those are a handful
Yeah.
that come to mind. What about you in the with the hardcore soft skills? What have you been learning there about the soft skills? Yeah.
Yeah, they've been learning it's so much, and in the world of in each episode, I try to address a different skill. Like
Mm,
one episode for like listening, and another
right.
for conflict resolution, negotiation, and even it kind of they all overlap in a way. But learning techniques and
Mm,
one of the key lessons was in the episode of listening. It
mm,
was just all these things that we think we talk a lot about communication and how to communicate
yeah.
effectively, but it's so difficult to become a good listener in terms of I had the guest I had on my show, he Oscar Trimboli, he has a listening what type of listener are you type of
Mm,
test. And for me, describe, for example, like I'm a problem solver listener. Like I'm already,
right,
trying to,
right.
I think of I hear you, but then I feel that you're asking me for a solution. And I'm like this at home, and my husband hates
Yeah.
it. So, so I just want you to listen and, not come up with a solution immediately. So,
Exactly.
so
That's
those,
every marriage, right?
yeah.
That can benefit could benefit from that training, right?
Yeah, so and those things that we just kind of give, we always think of leadership, when
Right.
I want to become a better leader, talking to the people, but there are
Mm,
all these other things that need to happen in teams or as individuals managing a team or being part of a team,
yeah.
that is just that we don't really pay attention to, like the conflict resolution, the negotiation
Yeah.
aspect as well, that it's not about
Yeah.
winning or losing. It's about more like creating either a partnership, like everybody could have a
Right.
piece of the pie.
Right.
So
The
yeah, it's
problem
just
with
learning.
conflict resolution is what
Mhm.
I found is when emotions go up, skills go down.
Yeah,
So it's easy to communicate when you like someone, when you're having a conversation that's flowing. But when we get into conflict, that's when the listening skills tend to go out the window, even for
yeah,
professionals. So that's when it gets difficult. But some of the other skills that just dawned on me. We have a framework where we talk about 5 levels of interdependent work in teams. So I already mentioned the least interdependent work is information sharing.
hmm,
But then if you think of this as a continuum, so on the far left is information sharing. Well, the next thing is consultation. So we can in teams consult on problems. Like you might have a challenge you're facing with a customer or something. A team can be a powerful place to problem solve and provide consultation to the leader or member. Rarely do teams use this and in a disciplined way. A
Mm,
third one is around coordination. So a lot of teams actually lack, individuals may not know what others are doing, and there can be interdependencies, not
mhm.
just within the team, but across the team. So coordination is the thing. Decision making,
Yeah.
massive challenge most teams, especially leadership teams, struggle with. And then, the fifth one is really doing collaborative work. We're actually in the meeting, we're actually working on a piece of work. But a lot of times teams could really benefit from training,
Mhm.
even how to do information sharing better. Because I
Yeah.
shared the horror story of the classic default, which is everybody gets 5 or 7 minutes to speak,
Oof.
and then the whole meeting goes off the rails. That
Mhm.
is actually something that can benefit from training, decision making training, right? Visual management. I think these are a lot of skills that are super helpful in team settings that I just find teams really lack good skills around.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it seems like it's so powerful to do it in a kind of not an individual setting, but just like as a team as a whole, like the giving feedback
Yeah.
as a team and practicing exercises to kind of like
Mm.
everybody giving feedback to each other in a constructive way. Or that listening or just it just seems like doing that in a team setting will be more beneficial for instead of
Yeah.
sending individuals to individual coaching or training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have two colleagues that I've had on the podcast before, Gabe Abella and his colleague Adam. And what they Adam Shu, what they oftentimes do, they do large software projects in one
Hmm.
of the big financial firms, and so they have like huge teams of hundreds, sometimes even up to 1,000 people working in large teams of teams.
Yeah.
So what they will end up doing is for like a week before the start of a massive new software project, they bring all these people together, and it's like a week of training where they put them through simulations,
Hmm.
even things like where they build a menu in a restaurant. It's totally out of the ballpark of what they're doing for what they're going to be really doing,
Hmm.
but just to start to get them, they learn lots of principles about agile and visual management and working with product owners and the like. And over the course of the 5 days of training, they're
Hmm.
really forming this group and getting them to develop shared mindsets, starting to get a chance to practice. I mean, when you think about sports teams, how
Yeah.
many chances do they get to practice before game day? And what they say is that by the time they're getting to the fourth or fifth day, the teams are dying to get into the design work of the actual project, but they're so ready. So they spend like 3 days doing simulations and getting them to connect with each other and learn about each other. Then they really kind of unleash them in the last 2 days to design the teams and the work. And it's just a really smart way of launching. And it
Yeah.
prevents a lot of conflict and issues down the road because it's go slow to go fast, really.
Yeah, I love that approach because it just seems like, yeah, when it comes to sports teams that they need to go one day and perform, and
Yeah,
you're building them throughout the year. The whole concept of like before you even go work as a team on this particular project or initiative, like getting these people together to kind of like merge and have a dynamic. Or I
mm,
guess even it could work if there's an already established team and maybe a new person comes into the team, a person or two, just to
yeah,
kind of like help them merge. That would be great too.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
So Yadi, as you think about your work moving into the future,
Mhm.
what are you most excited about, or what are you wanting to stretch most around?
Yeah, definitely want to get more in the know of team coaching
Mm,
and get now that I'm looking forward to continue finishing my industrial organizational psychology
yeah,
degree and also continue getting those lessons and just focus on coaching teams. So definitely have a lot to learn from you,
mm,
and so that's where I see, and particularly using agile either
yeah,
practices, frameworks, just to because I'm always very excited to work with tech teams that are building great
mm,
products or things for people or just seeing people collaborating together. So
mm,
I definitely see myself doing a lot more on that, and kind of like the whole aspect of the soft skills that you mentioned is kind of like
yeah,
integrated into that. So I'm
yeah,
very excited about working on continue working with team settings and just learning more and more as I
yeah.
learn in this journey. How about
You
you?
know,
You're gonna, yeah. Oh,
well, just to build on that, when I
yeah.
started, I got into team coaching in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and I would talk to clients about team coaching. I would get a lot of weird looks. It was like deer in the headlights kind of look. And but now 8 years later, it's a lot more mainstream. I just been contacted the last couple of days by heads of team coaching, or sometimes that's all they do is lead groups of team coaches in companies. Some it's just part of their job. They're overseeing team coaching as part of other responsibilities, might be executive coaching or other things in learning and development. So I think the good news is, this has become like a bona fide profession now. I think in parallel to this, the team coaching that's coming out of learning development, obviously there's the whole agile, world, which is hundreds of thousands strong, if not, I don't know how many million, if there's a million agile coaches out in the world, but it's interesting. So I think their organizations have been seeded with a lot of this. And some people might feel like the promise of agile and team coaching has fully yet to be realized. And I think that's true. I think
Mm-hmm.
the inertia of hundreds of years of command and control, the modern corporation is only like 100 years old, right? So, and the legacy of that is so deeply ingrained in our culture. It's going to take time. But I do think we are shifting from groups to teams,
Mm-hmm.
nested system of teams and teams of
Yeah.
teams. And that's what's got me most interested is, I've worked with tons of one-off teams or a couple teams here, a couple teams there, but it's really the cluster of 10, 20, 30 teams that are interconnected working on a big value stream that I think is the exciting stuff. And that's what gets me excited, because I don't think the goal is to just work with one team, right? That you can't create a high performance team by itself. It's only high performing in relationship to its stakeholders and customers, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think the end goal is not just to work with one team, because you can improve one team's performance, but that
Right.
can result in negative effects on other teams, right? So, but I think developmentally, the journey, like I started as a trainer, like I did training workshops
Mm-hmm.
on diversity, conflict resolution, communication. So I cut my teeth as a trainer. I
Yeah.
moved from training to facilitation, which was less prescriptive, where it was more retreats where the groups had to come up with, generate the content there. And my goal was to facilitate different techniques to get groups, large groups sometimes so I went from trainer to facilitator
Mm-hmm.
and consultant. I did consulting projects. I learned to be a one-on-one coach, and then I learned to be a team coach. And now I'm kind of doing more of like the team of teams work is kind of
Yeah.
my edge. So I think for me, that's like 20 years. I don't think it takes 20 years to do this work, but I do think learning to work at different levels of system, like
Mm-hmm.
coaching an individual, doing a conflict resolution mediation between 2 or 3 people was very helpful. Working with a small group,
Mm-hmm.
how do you get multiple groups working in concert with each other?
Mm-hmm.
Just moving up level, what we call levels of system. And I do think that takes a bit of time. And so I think if you just come right in working with team of teams, you probably don't have the depth at the lower levels of system that you need to be able to hold the space for the multi-team stuff. So
Yeah.
anyways, I think it's a very rich area that you can never end. You could do, multiple careers, I think, in this area, never fully master it, because there's always a lot more complexity to move to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm
Yeah.
very excited about to learn all the different levels as well. But yeah, focusing
Yeah.
on it's just seems like a very exciting field. So yeah.
Yeah. So Yadi, if people want to learn more about you, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so aside from my website, which is hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, that's where you'll see the list of all the episodes, and particularly if you go through
Just popped it
the
up on the screen here. If you're watching
yeah.
on video, yeah, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com. Yeah.
Yes, and you'll see a list of skills, and you'll listen to all the interviews that I've been doing. And also, the best way to reach me as well is on LinkedIn, because that's where I share a lot of like thoughts, questions, like journey, and I love connecting with people to learn from. So, and you can find me on LinkedIn via
I'll stick
Yadira,
that in
like
here
Caro.
too.
Yes, the link
Yeah.
Yadira Caro, and via
Yeah.
LinkedIn. So
I
just feel
put
free
that
to
here.
find me. How about for you? Where is the best place for people to find you?
Yeah. So I'll pop this on here. It's got to pull
Yeah.
up my LinkedIn. I don't have it handy, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Krister Lowe
Yeah.
on LinkedIn, but I'll drop it here in the banner. And then if you just Google Team Coaching Zone, it'll come up. You know, I'm on
Mm-hmm.
Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Um, I do some live streams every Friday, what I'm calling Team Coaching Learning Conversations. We'll have to have
Yeah.
you on sometime, Yadi.
Oh, thank you.
And it's kind of like where we have a group of people. It could be a team. It could be different team coaches from different companies or backgrounds, and we just kick around topics, and we kind of do a live stream to YouTube and to LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at. And then I'll put my website. If you Google Team Coaching Zone, and it's going to redirect you to a new. I have this new platform that I'm using. It's a platform called Teachable, but team-coaching-zone.teachable.com. That's a place where I have all my podcasts from the last. I'm on the third season now. So
Nice.
yeah. So that's where I am. But
Yes, wonderful. And I love your shows because it's like I'm getting like a private lesson every time. It's like I'm learning so much from all these people. So I'm like a sponge
yeah.
trying to learn as much as I can. So it's great.
Well, my first season I did 100. It was 100 episodes, and there was all really one-to-one interviews, which I really enjoyed. And then the second season, I passed it to another coach in England,
Yeah.
a woman named Chris Above, and she did 30 or 40 episodes. And now we picked it up. But I wanted to, team coaching is about team, so I kind of felt like the one-on-one interview, while
Hmm.
like what we're doing is interesting, but we should also have groups of people on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the idea of now season 3. I'm calling these learning conversations because it's,
Yeah.
a little less the one-on-one interview style, but I still enjoy the one-on-ones and all that. So, but anyways, you have a standing invitation to come. It's been great to learn
Awesome.
about you, and excited to hear about your journey and your advancement in the coming years. And, if you need any help on organizational psychology, feel free to reach out to me. I did a lot of years on that. So, I think
Absolutely.
it's an
Well,
interesting
certainly.
field. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
the opportunity and all the lessons that you've shared in this episode. It's just so many things that I'm writing down, like all the things that I want to go ahead and apply next week. So yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Yadi. Great to see you.
All
Take
right.
care now.
All right. Bye bye.
Ciao. Bye bye.